This particular part of our series of Interact Strong is focused on people. And as business owners, most often we are focused on what I call the doing. What am I going to do? What do I do next? And so what I was asked to talk about is not so much of what are you going to do, but how are you being? How are you being? And you're going to understand a little bit more about that as I get into the presentation about being. Sometimes it's important for us to stop and just be. And so we're going to talk about taking care of yourself and how important that is in order to take care of your team. It was interesting to hear from, I think it was Velen, to talk about the behavioral health aspect of what we're experiencing at this point. And so it's important that we take care of ourselves in order to be able to take care of others. And so that's going to be our focus. As we look at the focus of being, we're going to talk about leading in the time of uncertainty and crisis. And I heard many of you talk about how do I move forward in this time of uncertainty and as we deal with COVID-19. How do I do that? And in order to move forward, the first thing you've got to understand is, where am I right now? If you're not sure where you are now, it's going to be difficult for you to determine where you're going. So it's important to take care of yourself, take care of your team. And what I'm saying is we're not going backwards. We're going to move into what we refer to as the new normal. What we're experiencing now is what I call the parallel reality, is you're dealing with what used to be as you're dealing with what is going to be. So it's a parallel reality. And in order to move forward, you've got to understand that going back to what we've known is probably not going to happen. So how do we create the new normal? One of the things that I share when I talk with business owners and CEOs is that there are three major roles of leadership. And the first is to set direction, to create a vision of the path forward. The leader is responsible for saying, we're going to go left, we're going to go right, we're going to go north, we're going to go south. It is the responsibility of the leader to create the vision and the path forward. It is also the responsibility of the leader to ensure that the resources are available in order for us to move forward, and making sure that those resources are aligned so that they're able to move forward. Right now, many of you may be feeling chaotic, that things are all over the place, or we can't get what we need when we need it. But your role as the leader is to identify what are the resources I need, and how do I make sure that I have what I need in order to move forward. And then critical as a leader is to develop and empower others to act and to follow the new path forward. So the role of the leader is to make sure there's a direction, that the resources are available and that you've aligned them so that you can use them, and then to develop and empower others to act and to follow. And so as we are moving into understanding more about where we are today, how do I get others to act? Many of you said what's keeping you up at night is concern about your employees, and how do I get them to move forward out of this space that we're in now. One of the things that I also share, I do several leadership programs, and I've developed what I call principles of leadership, kind of adapting from Stephen Covey's model of organizational leadership. And the first aspect of that is what we call personal leadership, or leading yourself. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about each of these components. But Stephen Covey talks about personal leadership as being the core of leadership in any organization or any business. And then the next aspect of that is what he refers to as interpersonal leadership. And I refer to it as leading others or engaging others in order for them to act and to follow. So the first component of leadership is the ability to lead yourself. And then the next part of that is, how do I influence and engage others to act and to follow, or to lead others? The third aspect of leadership, or the principle of leadership, is empowering. Remember, I told you there are three roles of the leader, and that is one of them is to develop and empower your others to act and to follow. Well, you can't do that without sharing ideas. How do I communicate my ideas so everybody understands this is where we're going, this is how we're going to go, and then empowering them to be able to follow and to act. So the next component, of course, is leading ideas. And then lastly, when we can ensure that our personal leadership is in space and in place, and we're able to lead others and lead ideas, then it's leading results. Now it's getting to the doing. But the first part of this is understanding how to be. And so if we're going to get the results we want and the outcomes we want, we have to first begin with understanding how to lead ourselves. And I'm going to move through it pretty fast so that, we have time for some questions. When we look at leading self, we understand that personal leadership grows out of trustworthiness. And trustworthiness is a balance of competence and strong character. Strong character. And one of the most important aspects of leading self is that your ability to lead others is based on your ability to lead yourself. In other words, how do I lead others if I can't lead myself? Why would I follow you if you don't know where you're going? If you don't know who you are and why you're doing what you're doing? So to lead yourself, it's important that you know who you are. That's the character. Who am I? In understanding your character, it's important that you go back and ask about your why. You remember in Emerging Leaders and in your program, one of the first sessions in module 1 is about the why. Why did I start this business? What needs am I fulfilling? Or what needs do I need to fulfill? So during this time of, isolation, or, taking time to think about who am I? One of the things that I heard recently is sometimes isolation brings revelation. So take time to step back and ask yourself, what is my why? Why did I start this business? What needs am I fulfilling now? Because when we start looking at the opportunity to move forward, we may need to look at the needs. I think it was, who was it that, Dina, that said about coming up with the plexiglass, coming up with fulfilling a new need. I mean, they've done custom cabinetry for years, but now here's a new need that they hadn't thought about, but they've been able to look at that and say, well, why did we start this business? What needs are we fulfilling by making cabinets? And by looking at that, they were able to come up with a new need to be able to address. One of the books that I recommend to any leader is a book, and we'll talk later about this, by Lance Secreton. And it's like The Secret, but just add A-N to the end of it. So Lance, L-A-N-C-E, Secreton. And his book is Inspire What Great Leaders Do. And what he introduces in this book is a model he calls the why, the be, and the do. And he says most leaders spend time focused on the doing rather than the being. And so now is the time to focus on your being. But in order to focus on your being, you've got to go back to your why. So I encourage you to pay attention to, what is my why? Why did I start this business? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And what needs can I fulfill? The other thing that's important at this time is to embrace your fear and your uncertainty. Several of you said, I'm uncertain of what's going to happen. How do I move forward? I'm encouraging you to embrace it. Fear is an instinct like pain and joy. It's designed to warn us, to cause us to stop, to pause, to evaluate. If you use the analogy, I'm a sports fan, so I like, you know, my nephew used to play for the Boston Celtics. He now plays for the Los Angeles Lakers. He happens to be a guard, so just share that with you. But I love sports. One of the things is, his name is Avery Bradley, just for those of you who are Boston Celtic fans. One of the things about a basketball player is there comes a time where they have to stop. They're dribbling the ball and they have to stop because they realize they have to pivot. They have to decide, do I pass the ball? Do I shoot the ball? What do I do? But they have a certain amount of time that they've got to think about this. And oftentimes it's fear and the uncertainty that drives their decision of where to go, where to pass the ball. So while we're in what I call the great pause, the COVID-19, it's important that you identify your fears. What is it that I fear right now? Write them down. You cannot change what you do not know, and you cannot correct what you do not acknowledge. So write down your fears, the fears you have for yourself, your family, your business, your employees. I heard someone say, how do I keep my employees safe? We're having to go into places and do things that we weren't expected to do. Write them down, and because only will your ability to write them down and identify what they are, will you be able to address them. So write your fears down and embrace them. Billie Jean King, interesting enough, tennis player, the great tennis player, wrote a book. It was published first time in 2008 called Pressure is a Privilege. And what we know is fear creates pressure. And so many of you are feeling that pressure, and it is keeping you up at night. But the one thing about pressure is that there is an expectation that the more pressure that you apply, something new will come out of it. So imagine if you held something in your hand and you squeezed it, that when you open your hands back up, the only thing you're going to feel is the stiffness of your hands opening up. But if you took both of your hands and you pressed as hard as you could, the possibility of something new developing was probably pretty high. So think about a seed being planted in the ground. A seed goes in the ground and the pressure of the earth causes that seed to generate some new growth and something new that comes out of it. The key point about pressure, and this is something that when I do coaching that I encourage my business owners to think about, is to breathe. Many of us realize that during the day, we probably don't breathe enough. So practice taking some deep breaths. Practice taking deep breaths to relieve some of the pressure. But the pressure is a privilege, and as a result of that, it's probably generating something new that's going to happen for you. So as we move into the next level of interpersonal leadership or engagement leadership, remember, interpersonal leadership is built on trust. People need to know they're valued and they're listened to. They need to know they're contributing to a solution. They need to know that their ideas are being considered and decisions are being made. So I encourage you right now to recognize and thank other people. Ask them for their contributions. Ask them for their ideas and recognize what they're doing. People don't care what you know unless they know that you care, as President Theodore Roosevelt, shared with us. Roosevelt shared with us. So, you know, make sure that you're doing things to recognize people. One of my clients sends out care kits to her employees, even those that are furloughed. Those care kits include masks, they include sanitizers, and little cards just to say thank you. So some things to think about, you know, when you are showing your employees that you care about them. The big C, communicate, communicate, communicate. Communicate with your people, your team, that includes your employees, your customers, your vendors, your suppliers, your partners, your ABCs, you've heard of this, your attorneys, your bankers, your CPAs. Communicate with them. When there is no information, people put information. So communicate. Remember the big C. Provide information that's going to help your team know that they are valued. Provide information that's going to help your team address their fears and uncertainty. Later on in the week, you're going to get some information about some of the resources that are available for you. But one of the things I thought was important that you understand the elements of the CARES Act. You know, the other thing, we're not going to get in a lot of detail in my presentation. However, if there's some questions later, I'll attempt to answer them. But my last point is, if you've got some employment issues as it relates to the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, the Emergency Family Medical Leave Expansion Act, and the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, please contact your attorney, because not everybody's situation is going to be the same. People are saying if you've got less than 500 employees, everybody's got to do this. There might be some exemptions for you. You have to find out what's going to work best for your company. Furlough versus termination. What's the best thing for me? Understanding the at-will rights, understanding HIPAA, what you can and cannot say and do. So as I say, I'm not an attorney and I don't play one on TV. So, you know, I'm going to encourage you to talk with your attorney about how these particular laws impact your business. Leading ideas, determine your path forward. What is it I'm going to do? Identify the skills, the experience, and the talents you're going to need in the new normal. Ensure that you have the right people in the right place doing the right things at the right time. Look for creative ways to address your essential employees. Many of you may have employees doing telework. Look for collaborative ways to do that, where you can combine some of the Expansion Act, where your employees may be working Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and Tuesday and Thursday, they may be able to take advantage of the Expanded Leave Act. So look at creative ways to address your essential employees. I have one client that on every Friday, they're having Happy Healthy Hour. Another client is paying hazard pay or incentive, you know, for those employees that are going into hazardous conditions. You know, you may not want to look at giving a raise, because keep in mind that once you give a raise, you can't take it back. So look at some type of incentive. Last but not least, the one thing that you want to do is go back to your big vision, and yes, your strategic growth plan. Make some tweaks and updates. I heard from one of my graduates last week where she went back, pulled her strategic growth action plan out, made some tweaks and some updates, set some new goals and performance measures in order to figure out how she was going to move forward. Identify who and what you need to help you to achieve your revised plan for the new normal. And critically, communicate your vision of your business in the new normal. What's going to be the new normal? We are not going to go back to the way we've always done. I have one client, they furloughed about 150 of their employees, and that left them with a core group of employees of 40. And so now what they've realized is now's the time to implement some of the things they wanted to implement, because it'll be easier to implement it with 40 than to bring, you know, to have 280 employees trying to implement some of the things they wanted to implement. But critically, communicate what's important, your vision for your business going forward in the new normal. So that's my 15 minutes, I believe. And I'm going to stop and thank you for your time and your attention, and see if there are questions.
Hi, everyone.